Tonight's episode is dedicated to Dr. Ivan Van Sertima, Professor George G.M. Jackson, and Dr. Renuku Rashidi. Without the work that they put in, without the information that they brought forth, none of what I'm doing right now would even be possible. Ashe. Peace, Almighties, and welcome back to another episode of How the Earth Became Civilized. And tonight we will be discussing how Africans traveled into the subcontinent of India and settled along the Indus Valley, establishing one of the planet's oldest and highly advanced civilizations, as well as along the Mediterranean coast of Asia Minor and what is known as modern-day Turkey, establishing in what will become known as the Hattic civilization, and how these civilizations were intertwined with one another before later becoming usurped by Indo-European settlers who came from the Ural Mountains into Iran. Thank you for tuning in, and without further delay, How the Earth Became Civilized. And tonight's episode is titled How the East Was Won. Most people know about the pyramids associated with ancient Egypt, and some are even familiar with the ones of ancient Nubia, and collectively what is known as the Nile Valley Civilization. But what is little known is how these same people, these same Africans who settled into the Nile Valley, also continued to travel into Asia Minor and the east across the Arabian Peninsula into the subcontinent of India, amongst the Indian River, establishing one of the earliest and advanced civilizations known on the planet, the ancient Indus Valley. Yes, the same Indus Valley where I previously stated in episode 1 that was once the home of the Indo-European Caucasians. Well, previous to the arrival of these nomadic Aryan Caucasians, the Khoisan, the Twa, and the Akan, as early as the first millennium BCE, using their advanced skills of geometry and mason work, built great cities along the side of the Indus Valley, settling as early as 7000 BCE. Here we see the ancient city of Maghar, located in modern-day Pakistan, founded between the 8th and 7th millennium BCE. Cities such as Mohenjo-daro in Sindh, Pakistan. Dholavaria, Gujarat, India. Collectively and generically known as the Harappa civilization, named after the first ancient city discovered and its twin city Mohenjo-daro in 1921. Scientists claim they didn't know exactly who these people were who founded the city and have referred to them since as the Harappa people, allowing those who came later to be lumped into that same lineage, such as the Indo-European Caucasians, who are also known as the Indo-Aryan Caucasians. Now, before we go any further, I know everybody watching this seen episode 1, but just in case you didn't or don't understand when I say Caucasian Aryans, I don't want you to get confused with the group of Nordic wannabes that Hitler and them was supposedly trying to create or preserve back in the 1930s. I'm talking about the original Aryan Caucasians who came from the Ural Mountains of Russia, which is right above the Caucasus Mountains for those who remember, and first settled in Iran before swelling up around the Indus Valley and entering the subcontinent of India. The name Aryan was actually given to a people who spoke an archaic Indo-European language. So the Aryans was basically just the subgroup of Indo-Europeans. So you hear the term Aryan, you hear the term Indo-European, or in some cases you'll hear the word Indo-Aryan. The Indo-Aryan or the Aryan were the Indo-Europeans who they said came down and settled into ancient Iran before then coming into the northern subcontinent of India. So that's who the Aryan we're talking about. And the Caucasian coming up the Caucasus Mountains, we know that they came from the Urals which is in Russia, which is right above the Caucasus Mountains. So they was pretty much within the range and region. And so, these are the Caucasians, the Caucasus Asians, the Indo-Aryans or Indo-Europeans, who became later known as the Europeans and Indians as well. It's commonly believed that the Indian people today derive from the so-called Dravidian people, which is right and wrong. See, the Dravidian people, as you see in this picture here, they have the same complexion as Africans and Indians. I mean, both Africans and Indians have several different shades and hues. They're both shared amongst the two people. However, the distinct difference that automatically tells us apart is the texture of the hair. See, these people right here, these are the Andamanese people of India. The Andamanese are the indigenous people of India who scientists believe came out of Africa 26,000 years ago and settled into the Andamanese islands of India. This ain't West African, family. This is India. My man in the front, his face looked like one of them Olmec heads of Mexico. And these brothers right here, I thought that was Earth, Wind, and Fire when I first seen this picture, family. You see the Africans right there. It was a mixture between these people, the Andamanese, which sounds a lot like Adam and Eve. Shout out to my man Jay Servant too. But it was the mixture between these people, the Andamanese, and the Indo-Aryan Caucasians that created what became known as the Dravidians. And it was the further mixing of these Dravidians and the Aryan Caucasians that produced the Indian of today. So now we're clear exactly on who these Aryan Caucasians are that I'm speaking about. Let's continue. Now, the Harappa people of the Indus Valley, who scientists claim to have no true knowledge of. But take a close look at the structural designs and the artwork left behind, and once again, you'll see a shared cultural expression. From the Indus Valley stretching across Asia Minor to the cultivation right across the Mediterranean into the peninsula of Asia they now call Europe. And eventually, the conquest of the Asia Peninsula by what we know today as your pale-skinned Europeans. Even as far as up until the 18th century, a majority of Europeans, even recorded by other pale-skinned Europeans, were described as having swarthy or light brown to a deep, almost black complexion and skin tone. Here's an 18th century quote from Benjamin Franklin when speaking on the racial diversity of so-called European people. All Africa is black or tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, America exclusive of the newcomers wholly so, and in Europe the Spaniards, Italians, French, Russians, and Swedes are generally of what we call swarthy complexion, as are the Germans also, the Saxons only excepted, with who the English make the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. He further goes on to say, why should the Palatine boards be suffered to swarm into our settlements and be herding together, establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than can acquire our complexion? So, in the first quote, he noted that they were white and separated the English, the Saxons from most of Europe, and saying that they are the true white people and outnumbered by tawny and black people. And then the second one, he ends it to say how these same people who are coming over here, these same European settlers, same European immigrants, do not share the same complexion as them. So we're not talking about their characteristics when he calls them black or tawny or swarthy or whatever. We're talking about specific complexion. There you see it right there. So he identified him and his as white, and now he's differentiating them by complexion. Check? All right. And this is Benjamin Franklin, people. Understanding Europeans and the way they label groups of people primarily based on language and or even dialect. For example, In Europe, the people who speak French are known as French people. People who speak Spanish are known as Spanish. German-speaking people considered Germans, so on and so on. But understanding DNA as well as lineage, we know and understand that just like with our people, that's not completely the case with them either. However, by reclassifying and relabeling of people, it not only makes it complex to follow the true etymology of these people, based off of geography and the current people in these areas, the assumption is made that the people that are there today are the same descendants of the people who were there yesterday. At one time, these Europeans even attributed every northern African civilization to them and their ancestors. We know that the Khoisan and the Twa traveled the entire planet, settling wherever they found fit. So whether we're talking about what they call the Harappa civilization of the Indus Valley, the Hattic civilization of modern-day Turkey, the Etruscans, Proto-Villanova, Urnfil, Timulius, the Untis, the Beaker, the Baden, with the exception of a few tribes that emerged out of Russia who came much later, we're talking about a collective of Africans who intertwine with each other, creating complementary civilizations everywhere they can be found. So once again, tonight's episode really begins in South Africa with the Twa, the Khoisan, and the Akan people, who are collectively called the Africans. Now before we get any further with this, it's my position that terms such as Africans, Aboriginal, Original Man, Indigenous, and or Black are all synonymous and interchangeable. So before somebody comes along with a correction over the quote-unquote proper term we should use, collectively we are the same people, and I'm not here to deal with division or false narratives that we're not the same people. Although I will concede that we Black people are not one monolithic group. However, I will continue to show and prove that these are people who share the same lineage, all coming from Grandma's house, aka Africa. And although several scholars have tried to disassociate these civilizations that have spread across the planet while considering the similarities to be a mere coincidence, ignoring the fact that architecture alone proves these people were using the exact same technology, basing their structures from the same basic blueprints. I mean, look at this. These are thousands of miles away. This is not a coinky-dink. The same technology developed in the Nile Valley spread across Africa and across the planet. According to the ancient Egyptians, which we know was at the least at its earliest stage a Nubian satellite empire with several Cushian Ethiopian pharaohs, these ancient Egyptians claim to come from the mountains of the moon, which is a mountain range in Uganda, Africa today known as the Rwenzori Mountains. Here you see Bes, the deity of childbirth, depicted as the dwarf god. And not only was he worshipped in ancient Egypt, but was worshipped and represented all throughout ancient civilizations such as the Romans, Persians, the island of Ibiza, or originally Abusis, which means the island of Bes, founded in 654 BCE, as well as civilizations that predated ancient Egyptian worship of Bes, such as Nubia and Somalia, all the way as far as the Americas. But that's a whole nother story. But could Bes be a representation of the Batwa of the Rwenzori Mountains, aka the Mountains of the Moon? So let's go back to the Great Migration out of Africa by the Twa, the Khoisan, and the Akan people across the peninsula of Arabia, settling in the northern region and along the coast of the Mediterranean to the west and as far as the North India to the east, establishing the Hattic civilization in what is now modern-day Turkey and the Harappa civilization throughout the Indus Valley. The Harappa civilization, the same civilization I spoke about in episode 1 that originally occupied the Indus Valley, is the same civilization that advanced what became the Indo-European culture. Prior to the arrival of Aryan Caucasians from out of Russia, the Indus Valley civilization thrived for thousands of years. And although European scientists claim to have no actual knowledge of the people who established this civilization, outside of their achievements such as introducing the world to the first actual precise measurement of weight, the archaeological evidence left behind tells us who these people really were, and they was Africans. And you know, it wasn't just the architecture and the structure, or even just the artifacts that they found. But as you see right there, you have a chessboard. So these brothers was playing chess. They had board games. And as you see right here, they had dice. Brothers was shooting dice. So you know the artifacts right there tell me that these were some brothers. And we know they were Africans, not just off of the archaeological evidence, but the people. Remember the Andamanese people who came from Africa 26,000 years ago. They're still there to this day. They're still in India. These are the original people who came from Africa and populated the subcontinent of India and populated and developed and established what we know as the Harappa or the Indus Valley Civilizations. This is them right there, the Andamanese people of India. They're still there. They're a very small population of them, but they're still in southern India in the Andamanese Islands. They're still there to this day. These are the original Africans of India. So when they tell you they don't know who these people are, or there's so little about these people, they're still here to this day.
To this day.
There they go right there.
To this day.
And just as the Harappan civilization was flourishing throughout the Indus Valley, as well as the Nile Valley Civilization southward to the west, heading into the peninsula of Asia, they now call Europe, and the area what is now called Turkey, what has been labeled the Hattic civilization, was flourishing as well. And while the Hattic civilization grew, some of the people began to travel further into Europe, entering what is now known as Greece, Italy, Spain, and the islands of Great Britain. And like the people who established the Harappan civilization, European scientists claim to have no actual knowledge of the people who built and established these ancient and advanced civilizations. But once again, the archaeological evidence suggests otherwise. Sometime around the 2nd millennium BCE, scientists claim the people who were Africans who established the Harappan civilization suddenly disappeared, abandoning their great civilization. Some claim it was due to the encroachment of the nomadic tribes of Aryan Caucasians, also known as the Anatolians, who had come out of Russia and who for years had been attempting to invade the Indus Valley. Other scientists claim it was a mix of natural disasters and famine that led to the exodus. Now, considering the land had been cultivated for thousands of years, and the fact that these same nomadic tribes later occupied this region, usurping the culture and developing what became known as Indo-European culture, I would say that they're both correct. These Aryan Caucasians, known as the Yamnaya and the Anatolia, would also introduce the region to the culture of horse riding as well as drinking milk from cattle. But the question is, what happened to the original people? And where did they go? Regardless if it was warfare, famine, the Africans of the Indus Valley headed mostly southward back towards the Nile Valley or west to join their brothers and sisters in the Hattic civilization. And around 1700 BCE, these same Indo-European Aryan Caucasians who now occupied the Indus Valley will also make their way into the area of Hattie and eventually capture, sack, and burn the capital city of Hattush, also known as Hattusa. These people were called Hittites, and further research will show and prove that the people that they call Hittites was actually the Anatolian tribe of Indo-Europeans who originated from Siberia, who happen to be the same people who previously usurped the Harappa civilization of the Indus Valley. Now let's look at these people they call Anatolian real quick. Since unlike the Harappa civilization and its founders as well as the Hattic civilization and theirs, there's little to nothing known about these people. These same scientists seem to be very knowledgeable about who these Anatolian people were. Well, according to Wikipedia, y'all know I said Wikipedia, because this is where you find them telling on themselves. So let's see what Wikipedia says about these people and who they were. The Anatolians were Indo-European people of the Anatolian Peninsula in the present-day Turkey, identified by their use of the Anatolian language. Remember how I said there's a language. They label people by the language or the land. Check the language or the land. These people were among the oldest Indo-European ethno-linguistic groups, and one of the most archaic because Anatolians were among the first Indo-European peoples to separate from the Proto-Indo-European community that gave origin to the individual Indo-European peoples. Further reading, it states, the Anatolian peoples were intruders in an area in which the local population had already founded cities, established literate bureaucracies, and established kingdoms and palace cults. Once they entered the region, the cultures of the local populations, in particular the Hattians, significantly influenced them linguistically, politically, and religiously. Christopher I. Beckwith, American philologist and distinguished professor in the Department of Central Eurasian Studies at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Not that I give a damn about his so-called academic credentials, but some of y'all might. Well, anyway, it suggests that the Anatolian people initially gained a foothold in Anatolia after being hired by the Hattians to fight other invading Indo-European groups. Now, the people who preceded the Hattian civilization was a group of people supposedly called the Hittites. A further research will reveal that the people they call Hittites and the Anatolian tribe of Indo-Europeans are one and the same. Just gave them a different name, and that's how they try to confuse you, family. Just as the Assyrians came along and conquered the Hittites, the Assyrians were just another group of Indo-Europeans. Just as the Yamnaya or the Tocharian. But hold up a second. I seen something up there. You see what that say up there? That list? Let's go click and see what that list say in the top. This is a list of peoples who inhabited Anatolia and antiquity. The essential purpose of the list is to identify prehistoric cultures in the region, but many of the peoples continue to inhabit Anatolia and through classical and late antiquity. So the actual scope of this list encompasses the history of Anatolia from prehistoric to the Eastern Roman Empire, 4th and 7th century AD, during which transition to the early medieval occurred. So basically, they're using this term ancient to connect people who didn't necessarily share lineage to the landmass and classify them as relatives. So the invader, as was the case with whom Wikipedia describes as the Anatolian people, became culturally credited with accomplishments of those of the people they conquered. This is how they cut themselves in line of history. You understand what I'm saying? But we smarter than that. Today we are, that's for damn sure. But let's see what else they say. Anatolia was inhabited by numerous of races, and its history is characterized by folk movement and migration. Broadly, the Proto-Indo-European language peoples can be split linguistically between those who spoke language outside of the Indo-European family, such as Kartvelian or Kaskian. The Indo-Europeans are further subdivided into those who may be termed Anatolian natives, and those whose origins are elsewhere. Native Anatolians include Hittites, Luwians, Lydians, and incoming races included Armenians, Greeks, the Phrygians, and the Thracians. So 1 minute, Anatolia is a subculture of Indo-Europeans, but in the next, it's a location in Asia Minor which makes up most of modern-day Turkey. However, we know that modern-day Turkey was the same region called Hattic, where Africans had cultivated the land and established the first known civilization there, which has been labeled the Hattic civilization. So Anatolia as a location, not a culture, is the same location and place was Hattic. Yet scientists claim Anatolia was separated by two language families, the Indo-European and the Kartvelian and Kaskian, the two non-European languages of the region, or what they call pre-Hittite Hattian languages. Are you following me, family? Because I know it's a lot of foolery going on, but I just need you to follow me real quick. We now know that the Hittites is just a group of Anatolian Indo-European invaders, so these languages must have not predated the arrival of Indo-Europeans or so-called Hittite Anatolian peoples, because without the people, you obviously won't get the language. Check? So in all reality, the so-called Hittite civilization was an ancient African civilization conquered and usurped by Indo-Aryan Caucasians. Let's look at Wikipedia again and see what they have to say about the so-called Hittites. The Hittites were Anatolian people. You see that? The Hittites were Anatolian people who played an important role in establishing the first kingdom in Kusara before 1750 BC, when the Kanesh or Nisha Empire, 1750 to 1650 BC, and next the empire centered in Hattusa in north-central Anatolia around 1650 BC. Now we know Hattusa was the original capital of the Hattic civilization, so when they say established here, they're clearly talking about conquering a place that was previously established before they even entered the region. This empire reached its height during the mid-14th century BC Supli Luama, when it encompassed an area that included most of Anatolia as well as the northern Levant and upper Mesopotamia. Wikipedia further states the Hittite language was a distinct member of the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European family, and along with the closely related Luwian language, is the oldest historically attested Indo-European language, referred to by speakers as Nisali, or the language of the Nisa. The Hittites called their country the Kingdom of Hattusa, Hattian the Akkadian, a name received from the Hattians, an earlier people who had inhabited and ruled the region until the beginning of the second millennium BC and spoke an unrelated language known as Hattic. Follow? So they didn't have the same language. This is why I said they had to have, without the people, you didn't have the language, because what they're saying is the language that was previously spoke was an unrelated language known as the Hattic language. The conventional name Hittites is due to their initial identification with the biblical Hittites in 19th century archaeology. So basically, these Indo-Europeans became retroactively known as the Hittites in an attempt to legitimize or tie these people into the biblical and unrelated Hittites and not through actual lineage, which seems to be a common practice amongst Europeans, as we will further explore in this series. So here Wikipedia states that the so-called Hittites first established kingdoms in Kusara, then Kanesh, then establishing an empire centered around Hattusa, which was the previous capital of the Hattic civilization, noted by these same scientists. You see the Holmes family? You see the foolery? You see the debauchery on hand? 1 minute they establishing something, but the something was already there before them. How, Sway? How, Sway? Well, let's see what Wikipedia says about the city of Hattusa. Hattusa was the capital of the Hittite Empire in the late Bronze Age. Its ruins lie near modern Bogasgel, Turkey, in the Great Loop of the Kizilirmak River. It also states before 2000 BC, apparently the indigenous Hattian people established a settlement on the sites that had been occupied even earlier and referred to the site as Hattush. The Hattians built their initial settlement on the ridge of Buyakal. Buyaka. The earliest traces of settlements of the site are from the 6th millennium BC. Further reading states, a carbonized layer apparent in excavations attested to the burning and ruin of the city of Hattusa around 1700 BC. The responsible party appears to have been King Anita from Kusara, who took credit for the act and erected an inscribed curse for good measure. Whoever after me become king resettles Hattusa, let the storm god of the sky strike him. So these Indo-Europeans had so much contempt for the original inhabitants that they didn't just burn down the capital, but they tried to exact a curse on anybody even attempting to rebuild it. Now that's some wicked stuff right there. However, it was rebuilt just a generation later by the first Hittite-speaking king, which means previous so-called Hittite Anatolian kings spoke a Hattic language and were educated by these Africans they have relabeled Hattians. This can simply be proved by the fact that although their kings and so-called royal class originally spoke the Hattic language, when they arrived in Hatti, they had brought into the region a non-related Indo-European language with them. And only after conquering and usurping the culture did they enforce their own language on the people of that region. Right here you see a Hattic artifact found in Anatolia, which we know is actually Hatti. And this one is interesting because it has Phoenician writing on it. That's Phoenician inscription. And you look at the top, you see that? You see the wings, see the disc? You see Ma'at right there, that's Ma'at. And there you see it again in Egypt. So we're seeing a connection between the people and a shared expression of a shared culture. You dig what I'm saying? You see the Egyptian symbol, the Phoenician writings, and these were Hattic people. You dig? So, and I don't even want to say Egyptian symbols or Hattic people, quote unquote, because we're talking about the same people. We're talking about the same people from the same area who spread across the planet with the same technology and the same spiritual system. So, using words like Egyptian and Hattic is basically just going back to geography. Dig? Because these are Africans. And that's without a question. So before we go any further, let me give you a quick recap here. Once again, here we have the story of how Africans traveled into the region we now know today as the Middle East and the subcontinent of India. They established two great civilizations north along the Mediterranean of modern-day Turkey and throughout the valley of the Indus River between Pakistan and northern India, known as the Harappa Civilization and the Hattite Civilization. The Harappan, or the Indus Valley Civilization, which was the most vast civilization stretching from Afghanistan and the northwestern India, highly skilled in agriculture, metallurgy, and irrigation. Also, as I stated earlier, introduced the world to the first precise system of measuring weight in around 17 BCE as the nomadic tribes of Aryan Caucasians who came from modern-day Russia with the aid of natural disasters and famine invaded the Indus Valley and ultimately seized control of the territory, causing original surviving inhabitants to migrate elsewhere. And one of those places notably was in the modern-day Turkey to join their black African brothers and sisters. Not even a full century later, these same Aryan Caucasian invaders will also find their way into modern-day Turkey. And through mostly warfare this time around, will once again conquer and usurp the region, its people, and their culture. And once again, the original surviving inhabitants will migrate this time further into the peninsula of Asia they now call Europe, where once again, joined by their black brothers and sisters whom traveled the Iberian Peninsula to not only assimilate but to contribute to the civilizations that had already previously been established approximately around the same time they had been settling in the Indus Valley and Asia Minor, which brought them in the west of Turkey into Greece, Italy, Scandinavia, Great Britain, Ireland, as well as Spain. This all taking place between the 16th and 15th century BCE. Now these regions had already been populated as stated before and by different groups of Africans who had been in Europe dating back as far as the 26th century BCE and possibly even further, as well as migrating nomadic tribes of Aryan Caucasians who later became known as Latins and Anglos, whom some lived amongst the Africans while most roamed the outskirts of their society. These same nomadic tribes would eventually seize control of the land, which would then lead to the descendants of these people to rewrite and whitewash the history and origins of the people who originally established settlements and built cities throughout Europe. Now I'm sure you're familiar with their tall tales and legends, but are they just myths and legends, or was there a true inspiration behind these stories? Stay tuned to find out that and more on the next episode of How the Earth Became Civilized. I am your brother, the pragmatic Che Blak, and until next time, peace and power, almighties.